Thank you for the introduction. I'll just go ahead and share my screen here to get us started. So, yes, hi everybody. Thanks for joining. As was mentioned, my name is Dennis. I lead the machine learning team at VoiceFlow, which is a conversational AI platform. I'm also a generative AI instructor on LinkedIn Learning, so you can find some of my courses online as well regarding general Gen AI features. So for today's talk, I'm going to focus on how we can use generative AI and sort of push our applications from proof of concept to production. I'll be mainly focusing on conversational AI as this is my area of expertise. There's been lots of developments in the Gen AI space. We had image generation, voice generation, sound generation, and now we have video too. So very exciting space, but for today, we'll focus on conversational AI. So one of the challenges that we've seen in the industry, sort of as ChatGPT came out, and everybody's like, how do we get Gen AI? How do we use it? How do I build something with it? But now we're starting to ask some harder questions in 2024 of what's the impact to my business. So that's what I want to focus on today. So with this, some of the things that we've been thinking about is how do we create this generative AI maturity model for conversational AI specifically, and how do we help different people assess which stage they're at and sort of move further right? So we have this matrix starting off with an awareness, just knowing about the technology, having built a demo, which is kind of the proof of concept area. Then we start getting into these production areas with different types and capabilities within the conversational AI space. The other way to think about it is we have these two different axes of agent complexity and interfaces and integrations. So when you're building a simple bot, you might have one interface or a proof of concept interface with some responses. And as you get to something more complex, you're going to move along this frontier, whether you're adding more integrations and interfaces, or you're making the agent more and more complex, giving it more capabilities. So we kind of think of it as the further you go from sort of the zero position, the more complex it gets. And everybody wants to add different features. And for your use case, you should add different features based on what your customers need. So as we talk about the first sort of level of maturity within the conversational AI context, we typically think of a basic FAQ bot. With generative AI, this has been a generative bot, typically using RAG of some form, where customers ask a question. So here, typically, what people want to do is that they want to build an assistant that answers these questions and sort of limit the number of questions that go to a human. So in the industry, we typically call this deflection. Now, when we think about this, there are a number of key challenges, right? You need to make sure you have the right data. You need to make sure you deploy to the right channel, whether it's a web chat, Slack bot, Discord bot, etc. And you want to make sure that the bot is providing correct answers. So I want to talk a little bit of a case study as we go through each of these matrices, just so that we ground it in sort of real world scenario. Because oftentimes when we talk about generative AI, it's a little bit abstract. So to start us off, one of the customers that we work with, they're building an assistant that is a help center. They're an e-commerce company specializing in eBay bids, and what they actually built was they integrated Gen AI into their search bar. So rather than just having a plain text search, they have a RAG-based search, and they've been able to deflect 70% of their questions. What was actually interesting here is that when they first built this out, they put it as like a little standard bot in the bottom, right? That says, oh, how can I answer your question? And users actually didn't want to use that because they had bad prior experience with bots. So the chosen interface in this case was that search bar where you'd get sort of the standard list of search and then a synthesized answer with these Gen AI capabilities. Now, going through those list of challenges that we talked about before, it's actually pretty hard to get a bot out of the box if you don't have good data. So this is a continued challenge for many organizations, especially enterprise ones, where data can be disjoint, it can be disorganized. Many of us have probably seen tables that have something like a header of one or two or any other abstract name. and it's not well organized. So for any of these RAG-based applications, Gen AI-based applications, you want to make sure that you have your data that's well organized in its raw form. And then you need to do all the work that we typically do of chunking it, refining it, pre-processing it, etc. And much of the time, a lot of the data isn't very actionable, meaning that if it's not well curated, you can't actually present it to users in a good way. So all the things that we've heard about in past years of having clean data, having good data for AI and ML, all of that still holds. Now, the second portion is once you have that data, how do you actually connect it to customers? So this is a challenge because oftentimes the ML team and sort of the customer facing team were quite different. We have these silos that exist when people build an application. You might expose it as an interface, an API interface, and customers typically won't use that. So you need to coordinate across all these different teams. The nice thing with Gen AI now and models as a service is that typically backend teams or even front end teams can call these APIs, which is quite nice. And the final challenge is just an ML challenge in general is how do you test and monitor all these things, right? Quite a challenge to do so, but it really depends on what kind of problem you're solving as an organization. Now, I think getting to level three is quite a lot of progress, especially for many organizations. It means that you've gone through the process of talking with risk, security. You've built something that customers are using. It's in production. I think that's a great milestone. And the general sentiment is that we should aim to get at least something into production rather than hoping for perfection. But there are limitations, right? Some of them can be that you can't actually do any actions based on that. You can't handle complex flows that are multi-turn potentially, and it's hard to measure like what deflection means in this case. Like if somebody stops using your bot and is frustrated, right? That might not be the best way to go forward. So typically we want to move on to level four, which is building an integrated assistant. So in this case, we want to help customers actually take some kind of action. It could be resetting a password. It can be updating profile information. It could be completing a payment. There's all these different things that we want to do. So integrated assistants become much more powerful, and they require some of those things that I've mentioned, right? Integrations with existing systems, multi-turn flows, meaning that you can go back and forth with the bot and actually finish the task you intended. Now, going back to some case studies, so one of the companies that I've worked with, they're actually modernizing their whole support team to use AI. It's a top-down initiative. They have a lot of push for every product in their portfolio to utilize AI. So they started building that as part of their support organization. Now, they're using both voice and chat for customer support, which is quite exciting. And what they're measuring is the ability to actually fulfill those support tickets and get to a resolution, so task completion. They mainly integrate with Zendesk, which is their source of truth for documentation. So that integration is required via API. And they have some other documentation sources as well. And the final thing that they want to do is that if the bot can't actually handle their performance or the task, they'll connect to a human. Now, on the right-hand side here, you can see this is basically that iterative process of building their assistant. A lot of people want to say, I want X performance, this much resolution, task completion as I go through at the very beginning at launch. But this team did a great job of iterating through different products in their portfolio, adapting different techniques, just working very closely and monitoring how their customers are responding. And you can see here, this is week by week progress. It's been fairly consistent and it continues to go up since this graph has been created. So really excited to see when people are actually building assistants that are very performative. I think it gives a lot of context for how to build these assistants, and these are sort of the challenges they faced and overcome. So looking at some of these challenges for achieving level four, a lot of the challenges with sort of available APIs for large language models is that you need to connect to external APIs, right? So if you're just chatting with ChatGPT and somebody wants to open up a ticket or fetch information from somewhere, you can't do that out of the box. You can use the Assistance API, or you can use functions, or you can use these other integrations that exist. But just out of the box, a large language model cannot do this. This becomes also increasingly tricky when you need to authenticate and do some kind of handoff to people, right? So different integrations might be to things like Zendesk to create a ticket that needs to authenticate. It might be to your database that you need some authentication. So you need to make sure that how you're building the assistant allows this extensibility. And we found this with that previous customer and other customers. The same thing happens, right? That API integration is super essential. Otherwise, you just have a Gen AI application running for the sake of running. The second item here is waiting states. So typically when you're talking on the phone with somebody or in a chat, people might be like, hey, let me check that for you. Let me get back to you. And a lot of these assistants struggle with dealing with that kind of workflow, whether it's waiting for an API to complete or having like a push or pull architecture. So these things we found are super important to make sure that you can build this assistant that can complete tasks, integrate well with systems. Now, the final thing here is actually measuring this task completion, which can be quite tricky, is how do you validate user success, right? Um, Number of users can do thumbs up, thumbs down as a way to measure that, whether it's through a CSAT score or a completion score. I've seen smiley faces as well, frowny faces. But in general, you could also use sort of standard assessment techniques like retroactively using an LLM to assess if the task was complete. So a lot of different techniques here, and of course, human labeling. That's probably the best thing to do for your product team or engineering team to go through and label that data. Now, high complexity agents. I think this is what a lot of people dream of. How can we automate a lot of this work? And this is challenging. Typically, how we see this is how do we actually augment a function of an organization with this high complexity agent? We typically look at it as a way to do complex tasks, personalize for users, sort of have that full scope of experience that a person could provide. And the other thing is that if we think about that two axes graph before about high complexity and integrations and interfaces, the complexity actually becomes super important. It's similar to when we're coding, right? And we want to separate things either into objects or different folders or files. We need to have a way to structure all this data. Traditionally, in the industry, this has been called conversational design of mapping how flows connect and how information is organized. And this becomes increasingly more important as the agent gets more complex. If the agent can do 80 different things and you make an update to one of those things, you don't want everything to fall apart, right? So you need that modularity to be successful. Now, the agent that we've seen that's probably one of the most advanced is the one we've built in-house at VoiceFlow. And I want to go through some of the different capabilities here. We do this as a way to sort of test the boundaries of what's possible and help customers sort of adapt some of these techniques. So I'll go through some concrete examples of business outcomes, sort of how we've built it, because we truly want to push what it means to be that level 5 Gen AI assistant. So on the screen, you can see the different tasks that we do. We do FAQ automation. We help our support team pull up information. We do community moderation, and we have fairly advanced ticketing workflows. And we do use a number of integrations and interfaces here, Zendesk, Segment, Slack. We go through our web chat. We have the bot and our assistant. We go through Discord and Zendesk. So fairly complex. Let's go through it. So Tico has these different interfaces. We started off as putting something on the website, eventually got integrated into the product for people actually using the VoiceFlow platform. And then it got extended into the different interfaces other people use. So Discord being B2C, sort of to our customers, Zendesk being internal. So we sort of handle all these different customer profiles, and we've chosen to centralize it in one assistant just because we don't want to redundantly build all these things. We'd rather have it in one place and help users with each task based on the interface. That doesn't mean there isn't complexity for each of these. the way we need to handle Discord questions from the community is different than in-app. We have different context as well. So in-app, you can actually see what people have built as a Gen AI application. You can see potentially prior requests if the user shares that. So that's a way to actually leverage the interface to provide additional capability. So a couple of different components here. There's the web chat interface, pretty straightforward for chatbots. And for the support use case, we also leverage Zendesk a lot, sort of as that source of truth for integrating. Now, the main foundation of this is a RAG-based system, something that we've built in-house called the knowledge base, has sort of a managed solution with different integrations and different large language models. We found that this is still the best technique to do this, combination of both RAG and hard-coded answers. So this forms the backbone of this high complexity agent. Now, we also use multiple knowledge bases in this case with different ingestion timeframes and different audiences in mind. So from our Discord, we have a forum where people ask questions, we provide answers, and we ingest this into our bot in order to improve it. So every week, people ask a slightly different question in a different way about a new feature, and that's a really good way to make sure that the bot can provide cohesive and up-to-date answers, something that's really important for us. And when we push information through these different from these different sources, we also put it into different knowledge bases, depending if it's a general knowledge base, if it's focused at a technical audience, because technical audience is looking for answers that are more in depth, have more of a focus on APIs and coding and such, or we just put it into a general knowledge base. So we ingest from Discord weekly, we ingest from Zendesk weekly as we update our docs, and we do that automatically. And then we do a manual ingestion with technical documentation. So we'd push something into our developer docs. We'd actually validate that it works well for people and for LLMs. That's kind of interesting when you're building documentation. You want to structure the data in a certain way. And then we push it into the different knowledge bases. And based on what kind of questions a user asks or their background, so in Discord, if we have users that ask highly technical questions, they'll be marked as a technical user, and they're more likely to get a response from the technical knowledge base. So what's interesting here is that even though we use RAG primarily, we use LLMs, we still have static responses and use sort of a standard NLU classification system. Some of you might have heard of NLUs, also referred to as semantic routers. So basically, when a user has an intent, it goes to a specific workflow or task, because we've seen that this in general is a repetitive sort of high value task that gets asked over and over again, kind of follows that power law. So we want to make sure that we have a well-defined flow for that that's not handled necessarily by LLMs. A couple examples here, users asking on Discord, kind of highly technical question about the API, how to use it, what's going wrong. And this is typically a question that would require sort of a tier 2 or 3 support, right? Technical support, not obvious if it's just like a simple request. And the assistant in Discord was able to provide a good answer, sort of what is the user trying to do, how to fix the code, what are the issues based on the APIs. So we found that to be really, really powerful, is that these types of assistants, these level 5 assistants, can handle more complex things, right? Because of the integrations and the knowledge that they have. Now, for testing and monitoring agents, we go through a workflow, pretty straightforward. We look at errors or issues that we have and any new prompts we come up with. We pass it through a test suite that we've built, and we put those prompts or adjustments into a prompt store. So originally, we built this as a CLI where we would provide transcripts to users. We'd have document paths. We'd have different criteria to matching, and it would then provide you with an output based on this combination of which LLM is best, which embedding model you used, vector DB, prompt, etc. Now, we've migrated that since into a testing API where you can define this as JSON and actually auto-generate this, and you can evaluate based on different criteria. Now, there's a number of sort of products out there that do LLM evaluation, and what we found is that depending on your use case, what you want to match or evaluate on might be quite different. So for us, we have a number of international users, and we found that sometimes LLMs, some being worse than others, revert back to English, which is actually very interesting, and that provides a poor user experience. So something that we added into our testing API is this correct language field. So when you run through all your different transcripts, testing data, you can actually see if that field is matched. For some responses, you might want to have similarity scores. Others, you want to have like a text match. So you also have that capability to configure that. So it's not just a simple thing of use something out of the box, use built-in metrics, and that guarantees success. You really need to go through and understand your users, what kind of challenges they're going through, because the responses will always be different, and what your users care about will always be different. Now, we also have fairly mature analytics for this. So at every step in the process, we track sort of what kind of questions users are asking, like categorically, whether or not they drop off, do they go to the documentation afterwards, do they ask a follow-up question, do they ask to speak with a human? And we want to track these events because we want to understand how we actually measure the task completions or the helpfulness of this agent. So you can see here, users drop off at every stage. It's actually fairly small. Sometimes they go back into the canvas. Sometimes they keep asking follow-up questions. Sometimes it goes to a static response. Sometimes it goes to a RAG knowledge-based search. So we think that measuring this is really important because, again, the way that users interact with your system should inform future product and technical decisions. And this sort of continues forward for different workflows. This, for example, is the support ticket workflow, how users go through that. So it goes beyond just saying, here's my general workflow. There might be specific things that you track for a user that is super important. Now let's talk about business impact. So going into this case study, we had a support organization that sort of had these metrics, how long it takes to reply to users, how long it takes to resolve the issue, and then to fully resolve it. So an initial response that works, and then follow up with users afterwards. So the nice things with Tico, our Gen 5 maturity model assistant, is that all these metrics went down, right? The first reply metric is pretty easy, right? You can just have the bot respond and be like, hey, this is what I think the initial answer is. I'm a bot, which we think is very important to disclose. Otherwise, the voice load team will get back to you. So the person submitting the support request will always hear back from the bot usually. We also decreased our resolution time. We dropped that down to 1/3 of what it was, and likewise with the full resolution time, because the support bot was able to answer a lot of those initial questions, even the more complex ones, and then the support team can focus on some of those more challenging ones or ones that require more investigation from a bug perspective. So right now, Tico is handling 97% of support requests sort of across the different platforms from a deflection perspective, and only 3% get escalated to people. And one of the reasons why this is important is because as we as a platform have continued to grow, and most successful products will do this, you get more and more users asking questions, you have more tickets coming up, and the goal is for this automation to grow with it, right? So rather than having to hire new support people every time the product grows, right, you can do some automation for that. So in terms of the cost, these assistants from a token perspective are quite cheap. When we look through sort of the more complex challenges, human support is still the biggest cost, but the assistant is handling a large portion of that. And what we found interesting is that Before we launched Tico, sort of for the trailing 3 months, and then afterwards, we found that CSAT was maintained. So CSAT is customer satisfaction. So for a Gen 5 assistant, we can see that we aren't just telling the users an answer and the user is unhappy. We've actually been able to maintain that customer satisfaction. So that's a key benchmark for many support organizations, and we found that maintaining that is quite possible. Now, if we look at a more complex flow of all the tickets that are coming in, um, we see that across different channels, we have different amounts of tickets being handled. So that 97% that I mentioned was Tico in-app. We also have direct questions coming in through email. So these are usually more complex from larger customers. And the answering through email, we call Tico Assist. So Tico will go through Zendesk, sort of FAQs, questions, try to synthesize a response. And around half of those are answered through Zendesk and that integration through email. And then the rest go to a human agent. So kind of a 91 to 9% split there, sort of 10-to-1 ratio, which we consider to be quite good for this type of automation. Now, business impact, roughly we've halved the cost of the overall per ticket cost with Tico. So tickets have continued to rise. Tickets have gotten more complex, so it's not as an aggressive of a drop. But this really allows the team to focus on sort of the high value items. And this is really important from a business perspective because businesses, right, they continue to evolve. People have unique skills. People should be leveraging their skills, upskilling. And this is kind of that AI plus human augmentation that we've been hearing a lot recently. So definitely found that it matches sort of that hypothesis that cost per ticket has gone down, metrics have been fairly stable, and that in general, we can process more tickets with the assistant. Now, what's interesting here is that we've gone through sort of all the stages. We focused on level 5 right now because that's really pushing the boundaries, but we've kind of found that these are the different stages that you need to go through the different levels of Gen AI maturity. So again, starting with the left with awareness, just basic knowledge, the demo or POC, defining some criteria and running it, generative FAQ, sort of finding a channel, deploying it, testing it. Then we add more and more stuff, API integrations, multi-channel, multi-KB, some bot commerce as well that I didn't talk too much about, but also a capability here. So a lot of opportunities to go through and add to this. This is a starting point, this matrix. Depending on your business, you might have other criteria that you've seen and developed. So just a checklist to start off with. So again, going back to our maturity model, the goal is to start off with something that's level 3 bot, deploy into production, handle a use case, build those muscles of using generative AI, and eventually sort of push and go through the different frontiers of adding more integrations or interfaces or complexity, depending on your use case, and really building that agent of the future. So appreciate everybody joining the webinar. I know that there were some questions that were being asked, but happy to go through those and sort of, answer any questions now. So I'll be going through that now. Okay. So there was a question about what is RAG. So RAG is retrieval augmented generation. It's a technique using some kind of search engine, typically a vector database, to find relevant information, and then put it into a large language model to summarize and provide an answer. Will the recording be available later? Yes, recording and slides. I'll share that there. Okay, question here. Is high-level coding required for it? Additionally, why haven't bots been able to reply well enough until now? What are the underlying issues? Those are great questions. So for different types of different platforms require different capabilities. Some are low code or no code. There's a number out there that exist. I think almost every platform now has a low code capability. But for building some of those more complex integrations, it's good to have some coding background or somebody on the team, because then you can connect with APIs. You can do some of those data transformations. The second part of the question of why haven't bots been able to reply well enough now? I think it's there are many underlying issues, right? Sort of the things I talked about: data quality, good bot design, ML AI technology, um, a good understanding of customers. I think a lot of companies, and I think we've all experienced this, is that if we call in or go into a chatbot and talk, will be put on hold, or the bot is very simple. So I think a lot of it has to do with investment into building out this whole process. It's a highly cross-functional endeavor, so this will it's complex. So I think organizations now are understanding with this current AI wave what is possible and investing more. Are you utilizing other LLMs or micro LLMs beyond OpenAI? I'm a bit cautious about using OpenAI to have cautious privacy. Yeah, so in our case, I omitted another slide, but it talked about the different LLMs that we're using. In this case, most of the responses are GPT-4 based. We use Azure OpenAI for that. But we've used Claude. We've done experiments with Mixtral and Llama. It's quite possible to use different LLMs, and I would highly encourage when people are building to test different LLMs as well. There's always trade-offs between cost, latency, sort of reasoning capability, and so forth. Yeah, and then for each of those companies, you can review the terms of conditions. Generally, for OpenAI and Azure OpenAI, in their terms of conditions, it says they won't use your data for training. But again, up to the risk organization that exists at the company. Another question, Zendesk has the ability to maintain help documentation with the support tickets and resolution responses. How can we train LLMs for these enterprise data in Zendesk? That's a great question. I think this is for any type of data source or CMS, content management system. You just need to have those questions and answers. If you're using RAG-based technology, it's a good way to chunk that data and integrate it with your bot. So you could do so either programming it. You can use a platform like VoiceFlow. There's many different ways to do so, but probably integration with Zendesk and a RAG-based approach is the simplest way. That's how we did it and a number of customers. When we keep updating the product with various enhancements on existing features, what happens to the old documentation? Another great question. So we typically try to delete that or overwrite that document. So imagine you have document version 1. You ingest into the platform. Once we update it, we delete that old document. It does happen on occasion. There might be an old answer that comes up. I mean, maintaining good documentation is hard in general. So as long as your documentation is well maintained and you have that ongoing replacement system, that's quite possible. Something that we've built as well is sort of an auto ingestion system from different sources, and we use that as well. Okay, is level 5 same as or comparable to Copilot for your solution? So I think this is a hard question to ask. I'd say that Copilot is it has more capabilities in some way because it natively integrates with specific data sources. In the case of Microsoft's Copilot, integrating natively with Outlook or Teams or Word or Excel. But there are other limitations like accessing third-party sources of data like Zendesk and other things. So I think it does quite well on the integration side, the native side, but you can't necessarily extend it both from a complexity side or a integration side. So that'll probably change. Microsoft is making a lot of investments. Google with Duet is making a lot of investments. So I wouldn't be surprised if those capabilities start showing up. Okay, question about healthcare. So how might you encapsulate data for privacy on patient data and not entering the LLM? So you can always build out workflows that have static responses. You can always host your own LLMs. You don't need to use cloud services necessarily. You can host it on-prem. HIPAA compliance and other healthcare compliance is hard. For example, within VoiceFlow, we are not HIPAA compliant because as a business decision, right, you need to focus on a certain number of customers. So From that perspective, we do have healthcare companies using us, but not for patient information. So I think healthcare solutions, there's going to be a whole space for these kinds of assistants that have these compliance, that have these built-in integrations, that pass this stringent testing. Likewise for financial use cases as well. So I think it's an interesting space, but it requires a lot of investment. Okay, so those are the questions that came in through the Q&A. I'm going to read through the chat as well. But if you have any more questions, please put them in the Q&A. It's easier for me to see. Okay, I'll go through the webinar chat just since there are questions there. Okay. Okay, some people asking about the definition of level 3, 4, and 5. So these are terms that we've defined in the presentation, right? This is based on our experience working with customers and building our own assistants. People are building frameworks all the time, but we found this as a good way to map the different use cases that we're seeing. This kind of model, I think, we'll be doing more content on in general to sort of go into more details of this. But yeah, that's some of the challenges of working in a new space. Some of the frameworks from before are still very relevant, others less so. Okay, question from YouTube. Any advice on how to create a custom data set as far as question answer pairs? For example, do I repeat the same input questions in different ways using different wording? That's a great question. I think it depends on the use case. So in the context of if you're fine-tuning a large language model, that can be a great way with variations and permutations there. In a RAG-based system, typically you want to have a question or multiple questions that map to one answer. There's a common technique of query rewriting where you try to have different questions that come up and try to match against those and then generate the chunk or retrieve the chunk that's most relevant to them and then synthesize that response. So depending on what you're trying to do for RAG, I'd recommend start off with a simple one-to-one and then experiment if you're seeing that there's some mismatches. What server is Tico running on? So Tico runs on our product. We're kind of eating our own dog food, drinking our champagne, however you want to call it. Our company in general is 50 people. Our support org is 3 people, and the support org is responsible for managing all of this. So we're fairly confident that building these assistants is possible with a fairly small team, and that's why we're sharing this. This isn't out of reach. This isn't you require a 1,000-person team kind of project. This is with the right tools, a small focused team can build this out. Okay, so how is RAG used for identifying technical users and general users? That's a great question. So some of it is based on the actual question itself. Some of it is based on user metadata. So for example, within Discord, you can tag users based on the questions that they ask in the past or the number of questions. So if somebody is asking or answering a number of questions, they can sort of rise through the ranks. Right. So we use that metadata for some of that routing. Going back to the question about benchmarks, sort of how do we measure if something reverts back to English? So imagine you have an assistant in French. Your documentation is in French. A user asks a question in French, but sometimes down the line on like the 5th question, the bot might respond in English, right? So that might not be great, right? So people have found that it might be with the prompting, it might just be with the model data, but something that we found that we wanted to measure and understand. Okay, another question about returning links to articles or docs. So yes, we do that. One of the nice things with the platform is that we render Markdown. So in Markdown, you can link things, you can have images, you can have videos. So the nice thing about if that link is accessible in the vector database and the RAG system, it can go ahead and render that. Is there a feedback loop? where the AI was not able to assist and the human had to handle, do we retrain the model? Yes, so that's a great question. So that's kind of if we go back to that feedback loop or the different knowledge bases, we do curation for that. So let me just find that. Do yeah, back here. So this we do update documentation based on common questions, on technical documentation. Same with FAQs. So what's really important is when you launch to production, you don't just leave it there for 2 years. We've talked to teams who are like, we've launched bots and we leave them in production for 2 years. And our first question is, does your product not change? Do people not use the product in different ways? So we update the assistant at least a couple times a week. We version it every time using semantic versioning. And then we publish internal release notes on whenever we update and provide new answers. Question about how did it affect the number of people in the support center. So it's been fairly flat. We have our support org of 3 people. They manage this project. We want to align the incentives. So the support team, their goal is to best serve the customer and handle all the tickets. They've been upskilled and they're highly capable to do these kind of tasks. So they build the automation that helps them do their job better. So that's kind of how we've structured the team. Other teams that have larger support orgs or sort of separations between support and product-based orgs, still highly recommend for people to work together, have that collaboration, work cross-functionally. Okay. Do you measure the compared customer support before or after the AI use cases? Yes. Had a slide on that. Which LLMs do we use? Typically GPT-4 that we do for that, but we've experimented with others. API integrations. So I think this goes back to modular design. So just having, whether you're coding this out or using a low-code platform, just dividing things within VoiceFlow, you have these things called topics and stories where you can sort of place based on user actions and blocks when you actually call that API. We've also released something called functions, which is like reusable coding functions that anybody can use. That also helps. So just simplifying that, keeping good documentation is super important. For testing, we've used a number of vendor products to try it out. We've also built our own testing framework, so that's something that we've been doing. Thoughts on Grok? We haven't integrated with the API, but seems very fast. I think the inference speed is very impressive. Can you talk us through your Gen AI development slide again, please? I'm not sure which one that is, but if it's in terms of the matrix, yeah. I think I'll send the recording and the slides afterwards to review it. Okay, what's the best way to get started if one wants to consider these options? Are you using another CMS like Salesforce, Customer, HubSpot, Freshdesk? So yeah, so I think there are different options. There are point solutions, right? A lot of these companies offer that. From a complexity perspective, we've typically seen that customers are looking to use more of a platform with integrations and sort of customizability when they have more complex workflows. So sort of getting into that level 4 and level 5 is what a lot of customers struggle with. So we've been mainly focused on helping customers sort of up level to that without necessarily knowing how to code or build everything in a custom way. So that's kind of been our philosophy. We do integrate with a number of different providers. We've built proof of concepts just to see how things work out. But definitely an important decision to be made. I think it's fairly complex. It's usually a whole RFP process where companies figure out what your requirements are. It kind of goes back to what you need to do to hit level 3 here. We go back to this slide, right? You need to have your success criteria defined. for your demo and for your level 3. So without the success criteria, what you absolutely need to be successful, it's really hard to provide a recommendation. Which techniques are most recommended for RAG? What work well? So we typically use fairly simple ones, just question, retrieve chunks, answers. In certain cases, we do hallucination checks or chunk rewrites, but typically the simple stuff works well and it makes it much easier to debug. Can you show the slide showing the progress of the engagement? I think that's this one. Yeah, so these are some of the analytics we track. The way we implement this is every time a user gets to a certain part of the flow, we send a segment event, which is where we keep track of our data as our CDP. And then we, in this case, ingest into Mixpanel. We also have an API for retrieving this information. But the nice thing about the platform is that at any point in your conversation, you can have different check marks and send different events. And then the team can integrate with the BI tool to visualize that. Do you use frameworks like LangChain or Llama Index? We don't. We've experimented with both of them. We use I think one module actually from LangChain, which is the chunk parser, which is a fairly simple one. But because we spend a lot of time working on these things, we've typically found that building our own framework has worked quite well. Questions about chain of thought. How many chains does it run? So depending on the prompt and some of the features, so for certain tasks, we do use chain of thought, and we structure it with few shot, where we actually have the reasoning be outputted and sometimes share it as part of the API. We found that to be quite effective and sort of provides insight into the LLM process. You mentioned you check for hallucinations. How do you check that? How do you fix it? So in real time, you can use a model to evaluate it. Typically, GPT-4 does a pretty decent job to do a check. It is quite token intensive and latency intensive, so that has to be a very deliberate decision that's made. Other times, we go back and we try to fix the data or update the prompts if we notice that there are certain hallucinations. Okay. Questions on the cost of our AI system and calculating cost reductions. Yeah, I can go through that. Yeah, so yeah, here we go. So the way we calculated this, so we had our general ticket volume grow, as seen on the previous slides. We calculated how much the platform cost was, the R&D cost was, and sort of averaged it out with the pre-Tico and post-Tico costs. I had another slide I excluded, which sort of showed the general savings, but we basically take how much money we spend on support, and then we divide it by the number of tickets. And because the number of tickets has grown, the cost per ticket has decreased because we've generally been able to handle it. From a token perspective, I think I had it on this slide here. That Tico only uses 4% of the operating expense, including sort of R&D work. The actual token expense is quite low. I think it's around $20 a month, so not too expensive there. CSAT before and after, I think that I had that as a slide. It's pretty consistent. And another question here on multiple knowledge bases. Yeah, multiple knowledge bases. We haven't patented it. I think generally as a company, we try to share with the world sort of what we've built. The reason we join these kinds of talks, why we work very closely with customers. It's a general recommendation that we have. Yeah, I mean, it's good to help others build and be successful. I think if there's a lot of good automation out there, people's lives will be better. Another question about I'll answer this one first. Multi-languages. Yes, multiple languages. We found that ChatGPT actually is the most multilingual model that we've tested so far. We're going to do more tests on Gemini Ultra and Gemini 1.5. But Claude, for example, is very English focused, so it struggles with a lot of languages. So we recommend customers use ChatGPT for that. About costs and taking time to develop. So this is actually, we did another talk about this, but the very first version of Tico was sort of mid 2022 as a general deterministic bot. We had one version, we'd call it like a level 3 maturity Tico in 2023 with some basic answers, and then we sort of continued to improve it. So I think the main things that we did to go from level 3 to level 4, it took around 3 months as sort of a part-time effort by the support team, as they were focused with the core support things, and that kind of corresponded with the big growth of traffic. So in some cases, it took a couple of days to do something simple. In other cases, we've been working on it for a year and a half, sort of evolving this whole process. Another question here about optimizing token usage. We just use something simple, right? We get a few chunks back, we summarize it, we have prompts. We're working on something now to expose prompts actually to customers, so that they can make choices on if they're going to do few shot learning, chain of thought, whatever else, to do that trade-off of cost, latency, and simplicity. Okay, comment on person call versus customer questions. Yep, we like doing that. What we're going to be doing is actually elaborating on different types of questions later on, because some questions, right, they're very simple. It's a yes or no question. Some are like technical investigations that sort of really increase the time to resolution. So definitely something we'll be spending more time on and sharing with the community. How many customers can ask questions to this chatbot assistant? So we have it within our UI. Sort of if you're using VoiceFlow, we have a couple thousand users every day on the platform, continuously building. So for that, I think 10,000 actually. You can just go in the bottom, ask a question. You can join our Discord. Usually we'll get responses there. So yeah, it's on the order of magnitude of thousands of users per day asking questions. I'm a bit unclear on how you might get started as something at the company. Yeah, I think this was more of a conceptual walkthrough, but my recommendation would be to sort of do an assessment of where you're at. I think defining the success criteria is super important. What's the business case? What do you want to build? How is that going to go forward? Once you're there, build that proof of concept, build that demo, and eventually figure out sort of how much investment you're going to make into this automation. And as part of that success criteria definition, right, figure out like where is your MVP, right? Is it going to be higher complexity with one interface? Is it going to be lots of interfaces with lower complexity? It's a good way to map out what you're doing. I know this is not supposed to be a commercial talk. You could always try to VoiceFlow, but there are many platforms out there to get started. Many of them have tutorials, guides, and such to walk you through how to build a basic bot and become more and more complex. Okay. I think that's it in terms of current questions. Appreciate everybody tuning in across the different channels, asking all these great questions, and I'll be sharing the recording and the slides afterwards. So thank you for joining, and back to Data Science Dojo.